And here, Magnus has several good ideas. Knight c5 is good, knight e4 is good, jumping in with those knights. So what does he play? Magnus plays the move. Rook takes e3. Magnus Carlsen, you dog. All right, in the game, Hans Niemann playing as white. Opens 1c4. Certainly not best by test, but good enough for this game. And Magnus, how does he respond? 1g6 is the move, inviting e4 from white, leading to very strange complications. And by the way, this game took place in the 2022 Airthings Masters Prelims, one of the very first games that Magnus and Hans have ever played versus each other. And it did take place before their infamous cheating scandal game. All right, from here, Hans Niemann, knight c3 is the move, not going e4, and now Magnus c5, heading for the symmetrical English. All right, Hans, how does he proceed? Knight f3, bishop g7, and then e3 instead of g3. So with e3 here, white is intending for a fast d4, trying to seize control of the center, and it does work out quite well versus the early bishop g7 from black. Now, black, knight f6, d4, no surprise there. We have c takes, e takes, and here, the main move for black, by far, is going to be the Grunfeld-style move, simply d5, trying to seize control of the center of the board. And the point being, when you go d5 like this, if white takes on d5, he's going to have that weak, isolated pawn on d4, which black will be able to attack all throughout the game. However, here, instead of that, Magnus makes a slightly provocative choice. He plays the move castles. Now, when you're the GOAT, you know d5 is a little bit better than castles. However, Magnus here, his goal is to get a slightly weird position where he can simply outplay his lower rated opponent. And that's what he does. Castles, and the drawback of this move, it's inviting the idea of d5 from white. And if white plays d5, he's going to have a little bit of a space advantage and potentially a small but stable edge all throughout the game. And Hans Niemann, this guy is a fighter. He goes for it. d5 is the move. And now we have this little imbalance in the game. All right, Magnus with a very strong bishop on g7 and good development. However, you know, white has the space advantage in the center, and that will give white chances throughout this game. All right, from here, e6, challenging the pawn on d5, very standard stuff. White goes bishop e2, intending short castles, also very standard. Now we have e takes, c takes, and then d6, trying to stop that pawn in its tracks, and also opening up scope for this bishop, this knight, and so on. All right, from here, Hans Niemann, he's got a ton of different moves he can play. He can castle, he can bring out the bishop to e3 or f4, he can go h3, guarding g4. Lots of moves are playable. In the game, h3 was chosen, likely following up with the move bishop e3 next. That's sort of the idea behind this move right here, guarding g4, stopping knight g4, allowing bishop e3, coming up next, and so on. Now, Magnus, rook to e8 is the move, developing. He's also got a ton of ideas. Knight bd7 is good, bishop f5 is good, and so on. Rook e8, though, played in the game. Now from here, white castles, black goes knight bd7, the best square for the knight. It's eyeing e5, it's eyeing c5, and so on. Both sides playing very textbook chess so far. And here, Hans Niemann, he plays the move bishop to e3. Now, we saw this move was being set up by the move h3 earlier. So when white went h3, he's setting up the idea of bishop e3, as now knight g4 is not possible, and black cannot chase away the bishop. However, just as soon as Hans Niemann goes bishop e3, Magnus Carlsen, I mean, this guy didn't even think twice about this. He simply goes for the throat of his lower rated opponent with the move rook takes e3. Magnus Carlsen trying to disembowel his lower rated opponent. All right, from here, f takes e3 is the move, and then queen d7. So why on earth did Magnus just give up the rook in this insane rook sacrifice like this, trading it for the bishop? Like, why on earth did he do this? Well, first of all, Magnus trying to just make a statement versus Hans Niemann here. First of all, obviously, this is the show of like ultimate disrespect over the chessboard, just the wild rook sack out of nowhere. But second of all, the pawn on e3 is weak. Queen e7 targets the pawn, and now it's actually not so easy to defend the pawn. For example, if you go queen d2, the move for black is bishop to h6. Like, look at this. pinning the pawn on e3 and overwhelming it with the king being vulnerable and so on. So black here is very likely to win back at least one pawn and get a big attack versus the white king. And beyond that, there aren't a lot of open files for the rooks. Yes, the rook's sort of active on the f file. Yes, the c file is sort of active, but very importantly, these knights can come in and clog the center, and it's not so obvious that the rooks are stronger than the minor pieces, at least right now. So black does have definitive compensation for the exchange. All right, now, Hans, how does he respond? Again, queen d2 is met by bishop h6, pinning that pawn, and black will win it. However, if you don't do that, the pawn on e3 is going to be lost. So Hans, what does he do? Well, already on move 14, literally like one move after the rook sac, he makes a big strategic mistake. He plays the move king to h2. Now, the idea behind this move is simple. If black takes on e3, then your king is not in check. So it's sort of a prophylactic move. However, Magnus here, showing his class, he doesn't take on e3 yet. Oh no, he plays the move knight to c5. Why would he do this? Well, he's prioritizing piece activity over everything else, including material. He knows the pawn on e3, sooner or later it will be lost. There's no long-term way to defend it. Therefore, black here, he's kind of just playing with his food right now. All right, Hans, queen d2, trying to defend. Now, of course, bishop h6 is a viable idea, overloading the pawn. However, Magnus doesn't go for it. He plays a more subtle move, bishop d7, simply developing. All right, Hans, bishop d3, also improving. And now rook to e8, this being the idea, of course, of bishop d7, black clearing the way on the back rank for the rook to enter the game. And now Magnus once again does have the overwhelming pressure on that pawn on the e3 square. All right, white, what does he do? The move is rook a to e1, sliding over with the rook, defending the pawn on e3. But now Magnus, finally, the key idea we've been waiting for, bishop to h6, once again overloading the pawn. We have 1, 2, 3 attackers versus the 1, 2 defenders. That is just too much. And what is Hans going to do about this? Well, he lashes out on the queen side. This guy is a very intuitive, instinctual player, almost a caveman at the chessboard, and he simply lashes out against the knight with move b4. You gotta love it. All right, where is that knight gonna go? If it goes back to the a6 square, then a move like a3 could trap it out of the game for a very long time. Not to mention, well, I could also just capture it on a6, damaging black's pawn structure. So you don't want to go there. With that in mind, the knight, it has to go forward. And the only square forward is e4. So knight to e4 chosen in the game. Now from here, there is just all kinds of tension with the knights and the minor pieces and so on, if I can draw arrows correctly. So how will Hans deal with the pressure? Well, he plays a move that, quite frankly, shocked me a little bit. He takes with the bishop. Now, typically, you don't do this in online chess and over-the-board chess, whatever it is. Typically, you want to keep those bishops alive and instead trade with the knight. Instead here, trading with the bishop first. We have bishop takes, then knight takes. And here, Hans, again, I thought he would capture on e4 with the knight, but instead, queen d4. Queen d4, sorry, live take chess YouTube, queen d4, trying to overload the knight a little bit with the queen. The knight, of course, for right now, is supported by the queen, the rook, and so on. Now from here, Magnus, knight takes c3 is the move, then queen takes, and then bishop to b5, bringing out the bishop and simply targeting the rook on the f1 square. So the bishop finally doing a little something in this game. The rook goes to the f2 square, but now the rooks, they're not defending each other, and that could be an important detail later in the game. All right, from here, Magnus, how does he want to proceed? Well, it turns out the best way forward is actually just moving forward with the queen. Queen to e4, centralizing, controlling the center, threatening d5, and so on. Instead, Magnus makes a slightly more passive move, bishop g7, retreating and attacking the queen. Now, you know, you're attacking the queen. How passive can it be? But overall, this move gives Hans the chance to slide back to the c2 square like this, which is a very important detail, as now Hans, I mean, with the queen, he's controlling e4 and a4. e4 important for the e4 advance. If he can get that in without losing the pawn, that would be a huge benefit. And beyond that, a4 is also being threatened, driving back the bishop. So Magnus retreating, but forcing the queen to, ironically, a better square. And Hans still has the edge in this game. All right, Magnus, h5, pushing the h-pawn. That is the only thing super GMs know how to do these days, is just push their h-pawns down the board. When in doubt, go full alpha 0. Now, a4, expanding on the queen side, driving back that bishop. Bishop d7 is the move. Now, e4, sure enough, the queen, making full use of its new square on the c2 square. Now, rook to c8, Magnus pressuring the queen. It's got to go somewhere, and Hans, he's got to keep his queen centralized, and the best way to do that is queen d3. Instead, in the game, queen to b3 chosen, and this little minor detail, not having the queen fully centralized. One of my community members, I have a free online chess community, I just analyzed a game for him where the single biggest mistake he made in that game was simply not having his pieces sufficiently centralized. This is so important. By the way, if you want your games analyzed by me, just go to my free community. I have a games section. You can just post your games, and I will literally go in there, analyze them for you, and give you feedback on how you can improve. So, link is down below in the comment section and the description. Check it out. All right, from here, Magnus, he makes full use of the misplaced queen on b3 here. He flies in with the rook to c3, flying in, targeting the queen, and again, the queen's got to go somewhere. Queen d1 chosen in the game, trying to keep it centralized, a good idea, but now Magnus has just a diabolical attacking idea if he can find it, and this is a good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find this just freaking mind-blowing attacking idea that Magnus has right here if he can find it. And your one hint, Magnus did not find it in the game, so this is your chance to one-up Magnus here. All right, the key idea for black, and comment down below if you found this one right here. The key idea is g5, intending g4, making full use of the advanced h-pawn to support the g4 square. Really a terrific idea for black. Instead, in the game, rook c4 chosen, dropping back with the rook, but also pressuring b4 and e4. Not a bad move at all. But now Hans, he finds the flaw with this plan. He's too slow, and here Hans finds the key breakthrough. e5 crashing through in the center. If black takes, white can always take back, and the rook has so much pressure on the queen. But Hans finds an even better idea. Black takes, and then instead of recapturing, the move is going to be d6, driving back the queen. The passed pawn must be pushed. That pawn is a huge asset in this game, and Hans, the only thing stopping the pawn is now the bishop. That bishop goes away. Boom, bada bang, bada boom, d8, promoted to a queen, and Hans will be winning the game. So here, Magnus, he's got to defend. Queen to f6 is chosen in the game. Now, queen d5, the queen flies in, targets the rook, targets b7. What is Magnus going to do? Well, rook c6 is the move. Doesn't take on b4. Oh no, he drops back to c6, targeting the d6 square. So, rook c6 chosen in the game. Now here, Hans, he does take the pawn on e5. We have queen takes e5. Then queen takes d6, then queen takes and rook takes. Let's slow down here and do inventory. What the heck is going on? Keep in mind, earlier in the game, Magnus Carlsen, he sacrificed the rook for the bishop on the e3 square with the move rook takes e3. Here, Magnus is still down the exchange. However, he has a pawn on the f-file as well as the bishop pair. Now, if you know anything about modern chess, computers have shown that bishop pairs, especially in an open board like this, are worth at least half a pawn. And I would argue in this position, they're worth quite a bit more than that. So overall here, the material is roughly level, despite the computers saying, or despite chess.com saying, white is +1 in material. It's actually about even if you ask me. So it's anyone's game from here. All right, Hans, knight g5, an aggressive move from the aggressive player, targeting f7 immediately. Black, how does he respond? Bishop f6 attacks the knight. It is defended, and it blocks the attack on f7. A good multi-purpose move here by the GOAT. All right, knight e4, dropping back, forking the rook and the bishop. Wait a minute. Is that a clean piece? Does the rook move and you take on f6 with check? Oh no, turns out it's not. Bishop e5 check. hits the king. Black gets out of the attack with tempo against the king, and therefore the game goes on. So king to h1 is the move. The king sliding back, and now rook d4 sliding down, pressuring the b pawn and pressuring the knight. So from here, it's actually anyone's game still. Black's idea, well, he's got a couple of ideas. The first idea is to somehow find a way to push this pawn down the board, that being his extra pawn on the f file. Black does have the 3 versus 2 pawn majority on the king side here. However, beyond that, the other strategy, Magnus Carlsen is just unbelievably good with those 2 bishops. The other strategy is just to milk the bishops for all they're worth. Just kind of slide them across the board, targeting everything in their path, and slowly try to eke out a win versus Hans. So both strategies are viable. Whereas Hans here, he's got to find some way to coordinate his knight and his 2 rooks to perfection to fight against the black onslaught. All right, rook d2 is the move, offering the rook trade. Actually a good move for white. When you have the 2 rooks versus the 1 rook, it's actually a good idea to trade off 1 pair of rooks, as when the rooks come off the board, you're the only one with the rook left, and that makes your remaining rook that much stronger versus the opponent. But here, the problem with this move, you give up the a pawn. Bishop takes a4. Magnus Carlsen winning another pawn. We have rook takes, then bishop takes, and here, Magnus, he's got 2 pawns and the bishop pair versus the rook, which to me, that is just way more than enough material. The computer actually says white is still better. However, I don't believe it. In a practical game, this is not easy to defend as white. I mean, black's got a simple plan of b6, a5, pushing the pawn down the board and winning the game. All right, knight d6 chosen, targeting b7, targeting f7, bishop c3, targeting both the rook and the b4 pawn like this. If I can draw arrows and squares correctly. Rook e4, the rook slides up and defends, but then b5, defending everything. Rook e8 hits the king, king g7, rook e7, targeting f7, but now simply, wait a minute. He doesn't defend. Bishop takes b4. He doesn't slide back and defend f7. Instead, he takes the pawn like this, allowing white to also win the pawn. However, in doing so, Magnus, he gets 2 pass pawns on the queen side. All right, rook takes f7, hits the king, king to h6, and now there is no time to take the pawn on a7, as then you lose the knight. All right, knight d4 chosen, the knight dropping back. Then a5, then h4, gaining space, and very, very importantly, it may look like Hans Niemann is out of this game. To me, it certainly does. However, he has one last trick up his sleeve based on the coordination of his pieces. If you think you know, comment down below what you think the key idea is right here. This one is a shocker. We're going to see it in real time. All right, bishop b3 hits the rook, rook to a7, sliding over a4, and then the move is g4. Why on earth would he play this move? We're about to find out. H takes g4, and then the key idea, knight to f6, threatening, you guessed it, checkmate on h7. The point is, if the rook goes there, the rook is supported, as is the g5 and the the g5 and the h5 square. That would be checkmate. Magnus, he sees this. g5, giving his king a little bit of space on g6. That way, if rook h7, king g6 saves the day. But now Hans, h5, renewing the checkmate threat. Again, this would be mate, as everything would be covered by every piece. But Magnus, he's too good. Bishop c2. He sees the idea, covers h7 once and for all. There are no rook h7 ideas. And now here, Hans, despite playing a fabulous endgame up until this point, he finally makes the key mistake. The key move here for white is going to be rook to a6. But instead of that, here, he plays the move king to g2. And this is the beginning of the end for Magnus Carlsen's new rival and the future world champion. All right, bishop c3, chosen in the game. Knight to g8 hits the king. King takes h5, and here, Magnus, he's up 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. This is just too much, even for Hans, even for a future world champion. All right, rook a6. Bishop e4 hits the king. King g3. Bishop e5 hits the king again. King f2, g3, king e3, g2, and in this position, Hans Niemann, he simply resigns. There is nothing he can do to stop the pawn For example, king to f2 is met by bishop d4, hits the king, and escorts the pawn to victory. And for that reason here, Hans Niemann, he is forced to resign to Magnus Carlsen and fully admit that in this game, Magnus Carlsen simply disemboweled him with the absolutely ludicrous Rook Sac on move 12. Wow, what a game. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please comment down below what you thought. Comment about the Magnus versus Hans rivalry. I mean, what do you think about Hans winning, or not winning, sorry, coming in second place in Las Vegas in the freestyle chess tournament? I mean, Magnus has to be pissed about that. He's got to be absolutely furious. He literally like organized this whole freestyle new organization tournament run and everything else. And Hans comes in, he wins the qualifiers and just freaking outclasses him, getting second place in the tournament behind Levon Aronian. Wild stuff. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. If you want to learn directly from me, by the way, guys, I do have a free chess community. It's free for right now. Link is down below in the description. I'm also offering one-on-one coaching. I have my 2 first coaching clients locked in. I'm only working with 10 people at a time, so I've got 8 spots left in this program. Once those 8 spots are filled up, that's going to be it for a while. If you want to learn directly from me and hit 2,000 ELO just stupidly fast, join the community. I'll message you there. We'll get started and we'll make it happen. So that's all for today. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.